During humanity's war against Skynet, they not only had to battle against brutal machines, but also humans who turned their backs on their own species and decided to join Skynet. These human collaborators came in many factions, but one that has caught my attention is the Luddite extremists. So how did these technophobic cult-like groups decide to join the very machines they opposed? Firstly, who are these Luddites? Well, in the Terminator universe, they're an anti-technological group who believe that humanity's downfall due to its over-reliance on machines is well deserved. And this group of fanatics is willing to work with Skynet, the very embodiment of what they despise, as they have come to the conclusion that Skynet wiping out humanity is less damaging to the world and everything in it than if mankind continued on the path it was heading. Some of the Luddites have gone beyond just an ideological belief and have turned into a full-blown religious cult, seeing Skynet as an apocalyptic being of divine will, a cleansing force that will bring back balance to the world. And this fanaticism is nigh impossible to break. A very odd way to look at the world, but the Luddites believe wholeheartedly in what they are doing, and Skynet, seeing some use in these breakaway organics, might as well make use of them to its own advantage. There is no official law on how the Luddites and Skynet first met and came to an agreement, but what is canon is that the Luddites helped to manage and guard some of Skynet's human processing centres. These centres had many uses, everything from disposal of human bodies to being holding pens for human specimens that took part in Skynet's horrific research and development programs. That could be anything from weapons testing to getting skinned alive. A truly awful fate for anyone to end up in one of these hellholes. It's in these processing centres where scared and desperate humans could be recruited by the Luddites. If they simply surrendered themselves to the inevitability of Skynet's victory, they would get to live for a bit longer at least. And it would be provided with food, water and shelter. And many were so desperate it was easy to see why they would accept this offer. And it's highly beneficial for the Luddites as these new recruits could be used as cannon fodder for their plans. It didn't matter whether the recently recruited were loyal or truly believed, as they would be sent on dangerous missions and most likely be dead in a few months. This reduced the chance of any new Luddites turning on their new masters, and allowed the true believers, which were the leadership of the faction, to stay out of the front line's dirty work, as they always had fresh recruits for their tasks. Anyone who did survive long enough would be constantly bombarded with the Luddite ideals. This was a form of brainwashing, and would make a once scared survivor a loyal Luddite fanatic who would die for whatever Skynet needed. Becoming one of the Luddites had a few more catches though. First, they would be branded with a laser barcode and have all the data on themselves uploaded to Skynet, everything from their name to their DNA sequence. This allowed Skynet to know the strengths and weaknesses of these collaborators, and if it felt one might be a threat, it could have them terminated, either internally via the Luddite leadership or by sending its own machines. They would also be sterilised by Skynet, so they could not reproduce. The end goal of the Luddites was to be wiped out, just like the rest of humanity, and Skynet would not give them a chance to survive once the Luddites had outlasted their use. The humans given the chance to become Luddites would have survived years in the future war's brutal wastelands, and would already be tough and hardy, with many having some basic combat experience, most likely from fighting other humans for the basic means to survive. This allowed the Luddites to only give the basics of training, such as learning to shoot accurately, basic squad tactics, and only what was deemed absolutely necessary. This also limited the threat of the Luddites if they betrayed Skynet. They were an armed militia at best, not a professional military force. There was a place for the more gentle person with the Luddites though. They would be brought into the fold, indoctrinated, and then sent out to the world as spies and saboteurs, relaying information back to the Luddites and its master Skynet. The main information they wanted were resistance safe houses and bases, the identities of high command and chief scientists, and the location of any resistance advanced weapons and technologies, especially such things as electromagnetic pulse weapons that were a major threat to Skynet and its machines. After the recruitment and training, the Luddites were armed and supplied not by humans but Skynet. It controlled everything from the weapons they got to the food they ate. This way it could keep an eye on its loyal organics, but also in the case of betrayal it could cut the supplies and leave them starving and lacking ammunition, making them far easier to be dealt with. The equipment the Luddites used tended to be low tech. This was in keeping with their ideology, and logistically made sense as Skynet had little use for the older tech as the future war raged on, so these weapons and equipment that were lying around in old military depots could finally have some use. The Luddites would also loot and scavenge from the people they killed, normally only basic weapons and supplies, and if they did find any advanced weapons or gear, it would either be turned over to Skynet or simply destroyed. Their weapons were a mix of standard small arms such as pistols, shotguns, submachine guns, assault rifles and light machine guns, with the odd anti-tank weapon and heavy weapon thrown in, Also some rare use of flamethrowers, as their enemies were all humans and they didn't need to worry about its effectiveness against machines. This was enough to guard installations and deal with small resistance elements, but no way near enough to effectively fight Terminators. This led to the Luddites not being able to directly take on larger resistance forces, but this was remedied when Skynet provided support in the form of HK aerials and tanks that could plaster the resistance with heavy weapons, and the Luddites could then go in and deal with the remaining battered forces. This saved Skynet resources and reduced the chance of it losing its valuable hunter-killers to unnecessary resistance ambushes. The equipment of the Luddites was remnants of the previous military, with everything from body armour, radios, night vision goggles, anything that was still working, and the Luddites happily used it, as it was seen as the lesser of two evils, and it meant their ultimate goal of destroying humanity would come quicker. They tended not to maintain their equipment well, and once it was broke it was tossed aside. This led to many Luddite units being poorly equipped and not particularly effective. This kept Skynet happy, as when the time came, they would be easy to wipe out. The Luddites used various vehicles for transportation, mainly unarmed trucks, vans and cars, with some having light weapons rigged onto them, but no heavy armour or anything that was particularly lethal, as not only did Skynet fear it being turned against them by the Luddites, but also if the Resistance destroyed a Luddite force, it wanted to limit the amount of stuff that was actually viable for them to salvage. As small arms and unarmed vehicles were not something particularly useful to the Resistance, as they had an ample amount of them, especially once they got their logistics and infrastructure up and running. There are reports of Luddites being deployed via Skynet's own vehicles and transports, most likely as a first wave meat shields to test the Resistance-based defences or to trigger or discover ambushes and traps that were meant for Skynet ground forces that were going to attack in the second wave. The Luddites were loosely organised, with its leadership communicating directly with Skynet to receive orders and then distribute them to the various groups. These were kept small and manageable so that no Luddite force would ever be strong enough to be a threat to Skynet's operations, and if Skynet needed to purge the Luddites, it could do so in a way that other Luddite groups wouldn't know about it, so it could systematically eliminate the Collaborators as and when it was logical to do so. Skynet utilised many Luddites in small patrol groups, especially in areas where there were large amounts of civilians still hiding in the ruins of cities and towns. This was tactically smart, as the civilians could easily be captured or killed, as they had very little weaponry and effective combat training. Also, seeing armed men had the effect of bringing the civilians out, thinking they were resistance soldiers. The civilians would either surrender thinking they were being taken to a resistance safe house, or by the time they realised these were not resistance members, it was too late, and they either gave up or were killed. And as a bonus, if a large enough force was active in the area to actually destroy the Luddite force, Skynet could then locate this force and send in its own hunter-killer models to terminate it. The Luddites were also very effective at spreading propaganda, with them pushing anti-resistance sentiment, telling civilians that the resistance were going to rape and kill them and then steal their supplies, and to abandon the fight against Skynet as it had already won, and the fight was just extending your suffering. This was particularly effective in areas where the resistance had been pushed back, as people had no access to information, and as far as they knew, the war was already over. There was also a very sinister and evil practice occurring in Luddite groups. Human sacrifice had become fairly common in the most fanatical elements, and they would capture, torture and kill an unlucky soul. This was dedicated to Skynet, with the fanatics believing it would impress Skynet and bring them favour from the so-called machine god. I imagine Skynet simply thought, well, that's one less human, thanks for doing that, you stupid meatbags. In the end, the Luddites were simply an ally of convenience for Skynet, and even though useful in simple duties, they had little long-term use, and when the time came, Skynet would eliminate them once they had outlived any purpose. And given their beliefs, the Luddites would have welcomed death, maybe even committing suicide if Skynet asked. These collaborators were seen as the lowest of the low by the rest of humanity, and any to be found alive after humanity's victory in the future war would have been punished with the only way that was fit, a plasma shot to the head. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Some of it uses expanded lore and canon, obviously, and some is kind of like fan fiction that I've added in. So, take it with a pinch of salt. I thought it'd make an interesting video, and I thought it's probably the best out there for the expanded universe, because I didn't really see anything on the Luddite collaborators. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you're having a beautiful weekend or week whenever you're watching, and I'll see you on the next one.